Good afternoon, Dr. Murray. Thank you for joining this afternoon to discuss your book, In Pursuit of Happiness and Good Government. I was hoping you could start off by just telling us a bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Charles Murray, and I grew up in Newton, Iowa, the home of the Maytag Company once upon a time. And I went from there to the big city, Harvard, and from there to Thailand for 6 years, and then subsequently I worked analyzing public policy essentially for more than 40 years now. And I've been with my current employer, the American Enterprise Institute, for 23 years.
In your prologue, you had talked about the work you did with the Peace Corps in a Thai village. I was hoping you could expand on that a bit.
Thailand was actually the basis for the way I look at the world. I had been working as a Peace Corps volunteer initially, and so I was in a program called the Village Health and Sanitation Program. The idea was that you take a young liberal arts graduate, age 22, give them 3 months of training, and they're supposed to go over and tell Thai officials who've been doing this for 30 years how to do their job. That really was the kind of presumption that Peace Corps had in those days. So I did that for 2 years. I was smart enough not to think that I knew more than my counterparts knew. But all that time I was watching the villages from Bangkok's point of view. You know, we're trying to help the villagers. After I left Peace Corps, I did a research project in which we were trying to assess the villagers' attitudes toward the Thai government. And did the programs make them love the Thai government and so forth. And that was a revelation. First, it was a revelation that, seen from the villagers' perspectives, these government programs were complete failures. The government didn't understand the lives of the villagers, they didn't understand the conditions, they just made mistake after mistake. The other thing I learned was that when the government wasn't around, the villagers did actually a very good job of running their own village. Not using procedures given to them by outsiders, but procedures that they had developed themselves. And it was that revelation of how well people ran their own lives. That was one revelation. The other revelation was that all of these government programs that look so good on paper really don't accomplish anything. That shifted my whole attitude toward the relationship between government and people.
Great. What is the basic premise of In Pursuit?
The basic premise of In Pursuit is that we will get better government policy if we have a better dependent variable, to use the social science jargon. By dependent variable, I mean, what is the thing you are trying to increase or decrease? The way we usually think about it is, oh, we want to decrease poverty, or we want to increase employment. What if we back off from that and say the real dependent variable is we want to increase the ability of people to pursue happiness? And how does policy help or hinder in that effort? To start to ask that question, instead of the usual question about policy, forces you to confront a whole variety of issues that usually don't enter into the policy debate.
The title of your book contains two terms that mean different things to different people. First, I was hoping you could explain what you meant by happiness.
I use a definition that is just completely middle of the road. It arrives originally from Aristotle in his discussion in the Nicomachean Ethics. But it has, over the centuries, been transmuted into sort of a general understanding of justified and lasting satisfaction with life as a whole. There are a couple of barbs in that definition. One, lasting satisfaction. You know, sex is fun, but doesn't last for a whole long time. Buttered popcorn is pleasant, but that's ephemeral. Lasting satisfactions are things that stay with you permanently. And justified. There's the question of, well, suppose someone finds great satisfaction in hurting other people. And I guess there are some people who in a very twisted way do, sadists. That's not justified by any possible standard. And so the nature of the satisfactions has to be considered in a moral context. So that's the definition of happiness. And I will point out, you know, if you ask people what they think happiness is, as I did when I was working on the book, I got a very common first reaction. Oh, you can't talk about happiness because people have all these weird ideas about happiness. They think happiness is sitting on a beach watching a sunset or surfing, and I say, okay, but what do you think happiness is? Almost invariably, they would give me a definition that's very similar to lasting and justified satisfaction with life as a whole. Everybody thinks that everybody else has a weird definition of happiness, but they themselves don't.
Now, the term good government may even be more controversial. How would you define good government?
When you write books, one of the great difficulties is coming up with a title. And I always liked In Pursuit as a title. In retrospect, I'm not sure it was a good title, but then we had to come up with a subtitle. And we went through the tortures of the damned trying to do it. And so eventually I wanted the subtitle to be the old-fashioned thing where in the 18th century people would have of such and such and such and such. And the only phrase that I could come up with was good government. And so the real answer to your question is, the reason I use good government is because I was trying to get a title that would convey what was in the book, and I didn't do a very good job of it. So I refused to defend the phrase good government. The sense of the book, of course, is the role of government. What good government means. What is government at its best supposed to do, and more importantly, not supposed to do. The phrase itself, I have no particular brief to make for.
You've read many works of our founding fathers. Which founding father has influenced you the most?
Well, admire most and the most influential are two different things. I admire George Washington immensely, and the more I learn about him, the more I admire him. He wasn't a particularly good general, but he was a wonderful leader of men. And it is true that the revolution would not have succeeded without him. But even more important than that is to look at his presidency, where everything he did was a precedent. And he realized that. He was very conscious of that. And you think of all the things he did and try to ask yourself, what precedent did he set that we wish he hadn't? I can't think of any. The man just took this, this office that was his to define, and he defined it beautifully. So he's the one I admire the most. In terms of statement of philosophy, I suppose Thomas Jefferson is closest to the way I look at the world. But James Madison, in terms of his role in creating the Constitution, is way up there in my estimation. So I guess those three.
You also mentioned throughout your book and in your acknowledgement section many of the Liberty Fund authors that have influenced you. John Stuart Mill, John Locke, Adam Smith, Friedrich Hayek, Robert Nisbet. Which do you feel has been the most influential on you, and why?
Well, the pair of books that influenced me the most, I suppose, are Wealth of Nations, but even more so, Theory of Moral Sentiments. I think Theory of Moral Sentiments should be required reading for every libertarian, because Adam Smith understood completely the ways in which liberty and community go together, and the reasons of that a free society can work because of his brilliant evocation of the idea of approbation, that human beings may not be moral in some grand philosophical sense, but human beings do want the approbation of people around them. And that is a natural mechanism comparable to the invisible hand for making society work. Adam Smith, he's my guy as far as the original thinkers are concerned. However, I have to say that Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia blew me away. I just love that book. And another book that in the modern era that I really liked is Richard Epstein's Takings, which I consider to be absolutely brilliant.
I've heard you say that of all the books you've written, In Pursuit has been your favorite. Why? What makes it your favorite?
I think I did my best thinking in Pursuit. I think I came up with things that I'm still proud that I came up with. And I will also say it was a hell of a lot of work. If you, I mean, first place, just go through the book, there are a lot of different disciplines that are discussed in different chapters. But the chapter I remember best is Little Platoons, which is toward the end. At one time I knew the number of drafts that chapter had gone through. I've forgotten now, but what, 13, 15? And by that I don't mean little tweakings of the draft. I mean major revisions and new sections and the rest of it. And that chapter alone took a matter of months. And so both the content of it and also the sense of achievement that I had in completing it have gone into saying it's my favorite book. I should also add that if you read everything I've written since, whether it's The Bell Curve, which I did with Dick Hernstein, or What It Means to Be a Libertarian, or Human Accomplishment, or Real Education, or In Our Hands, every one of those, and my most recent book, Coming Apart, every one of those draws on themes that were first expressed in Pursuit.
Who do you think would benefit the most from reading your book, and why?
I think that policymakers should think about human flourishing as the thing they're trying to maximize. And once you start to think about human flourishing as the thing you're trying to maximize, then a few things start to pop out at you, such as a wonderful phrase that Arthur Brooks, who's now president of AEI, came up with called earned success, where Arthur is saying that all human beings need to have a sense of earned success in their lives to be happy. So the fact is, I can't answer your question except to say everybody who deals in public policy ought to start thinking this way.
After all your research and the books you've written, how optimistic are you about the direction humanity is heading?
I react to that question differently if we're talking about the short term or the long term. In the short term, things look pretty bleak right now. There are lots of ways in which the wealth of modern societies, I think, is working against some of the ideas of liberty that I've tried to advance along with so many others. But in the longer term, I'm optimistic. In part, I'm optimistic because the welfare state is going to run into a dead end financially, but I also think morally. Here's the way I think of it. Let's think 400 years ahead, and let's assume that human beings have not been monumentally stupid, and so wealth has continued to increase. It is inconceivable to me that at the levels of wealth that will exist 400 years from now, that people will say, you know, the way to run societies is to have these huge bureaucracies filled with people telling each other how to live. It just doesn't make any sense, because at some point we'll be rich enough to say, you know, actually we can just give everybody enough money to live in existence. We don't have to have all these bureaucracies overseeing. If we libertarians are wrong about human beings and human nature, if it is true that human beings actually can flourish as well without earned success, without overcoming challenges, if we're wrong, then we'll lose. If we are right that human beings are evolutionarily hardwired to want to live meaningful lives, and that meaningful lives involve challenge, involve overcoming obstacles, involve exercising your personhood to shape your world. If we are right about that, we can't lose.
Thank you very much, Dr. Murray, for sharing your time with us and answering some questions.